Hey, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Uncommon Comedy Podcast. I am your host, Brian Apprille. I'm not going to mess around today. We're going to get right into it because our guest today is absolutely amazing, and I've been really looking forward to this interview. He is a longtime comedian, been around, knows everybody, done everything you can possibly do in this business, and was also the talent coordinator for comedy and the warm-up act for the Late Night with David Letterman. So we're just going to bring him right in. Please welcome Eddie Brill. Eddie Brill, come on in, sir. How are you?
I'm here, and just to correct you, it's Late Show. Late Night
Show,
was
sorry.
the NBC show. No, it's okay. A lot of people say that. The Late Night was the NBC show that eventually Conan got and Seth Meyers now has. And
okay.
I was at the CBS show, which was called The Late Show.
The Late Show with David Letterman. I always I knew I was going to stumble on that.
But you're not the only one. It's been in news, on the news, on the networks, in the magazines. They get it messed up.
You know what it is? I actually even Googled it last night to make sure I had it, and that's probably where I got it. So I can't trust the internet these days.
No, anyways. You can't. But, I can't trust myself because the other day I was trying to find out the difference between ITS or IT apostrophe S. Because I'm confused by that. Now, It has the apostrophe, it has, or it is, or something like that. And then there's its, which is, a different version. And I learned it and I studied it and I did it. And then I wrote an article and I put it in and I did the wrong one. So you can't trust me.
No, that's always an interesting one. People get that one all messed up all the time. That there, and there. They always mess those as well.
There's 3 ways to spell 2. There's 2 ways to spell 4. There's other ways. There's many ways to spell 8. There's many ways to spell 1. It's very interesting how difficult the language can be. And and as much as I study it, I have a brain freeze on it. And I'm sure people know it better than me, and I've been writing forever and I still mess that one up.
Well, and the problem is it's reverse because the possessive is without the apostrophe.
Right.
Which every other thing for possessive has the apostrophe. So it's just backwards. So it doesn't follow the logic of the rest of the language. So that's no wonder people mess that up. And it's interesting you bring that up because one of the things that I love about your comedy, I got to see you do comedy like 3 or 4 years ago, I think, when we met the Clean Comedy Conference. And you have so much wordplay and you're so smart and you have intelligent humor and you have this I don't care attitude and you're a New York comic. I think we can classify that. And that generally has a lot of people have the stereotype of New York comics as like they're just going to come up and they're just going to curse and whatever and just be aggressive and nasty and you have this whole different attitude. You have the I don't care kind of feeling, but you have this wonderful intellect and this amazing sense of humor. And I think it's the thing I really, really appreciate about you and your style.
Well, I appreciate those really nice words, but I will tell you that right away, it shows that we should never make assumptions about an area or anything because New York has always been the breeding ground for some of the smartest comedians. As you can look at Philadelphia with David Brenner and, Dom Irrera, and you can look at New York with George Carlin, and you could look at Boston with Lenny Clark and Jay Leno, or you could look at, and say that this comic is a certain way because they're from that area. Or New Yorkers have attitudes or they're evil. And in fact, it's the opposite way. One of the things and another different kind of assumption is like that people who are vegan or vegetarian or have no energy and all this. And a lot of comedians do jokes about that when in reality, you're so much more energetic when you eat that way. And that's not the point I wanted to make because a lot of people freak out when you talk about their food and taking it away or whatever. It's almost like the Second Amendment of food. Don't take away my steaks. But the whole thing is to make an assumption on it. Now, separately from that assumption is that, I always loved words and I always loved wordplay. And I found sort of my match when I saw George Carlin on television with his wordplay, and that inspired me even more. And then I always liked intelligent comedy. Like the movie Being There, the Peter Sellers movie, to me is one of the best comedies in the world because it's so smart and subtle and great. But then again, Blazing Saddles is one of the funniest movies on the planet, which is the opposite end of that, which shows so many different kinds of ways. But the other part is, you said the I don't care sort of attitude.
Mm-hmm.
I've only learned that in the last 5 to 6 years, I would say, and I don't even know if it's 5 or 6, but in the most recent part of my life, because I learned that I did a podcast years ago, a very good podcast that actually came out of Finland, and it was called "We Are Not Here to Please You," and it was very smart and very cool, and I love the attitude of "We're not here to please you," and it just clicked for me that as a comedian, my job isn't to please the audience, to kowtow to what they want. My job is to do what I love and talk about the things that inspire me. And if the audience likes it, that's fantastic. And then you look at dating, or you look at any other aspect of life. If you're just kissing somebody else's ass, or I hope we can say a butt, okay, kissing someone's behind, it's not as attractive as if you have your own strength, your own backbone. My comedy has grown leaps and bounds since I've taken up the attitude of, not mean. I want you to laugh. I want you to be pleased with what I do, but I'm not here. My job isn't to please you or to find out what you like and then cater to that.
That's really interesting, because some people, when you hear this, like, oh, I don't care, they mistake that as I don't care about the performance I'm giving, and that's not what we're talking about at all.
The opposite. I love it so much, and I care so much about it. And I can't tell you, we're recording now. Here we are in almost June, and I haven't been on stage for a live show since the middle of March, and I'm going crazy because I love it so much.
Yeah, it's interesting because I've heard a few people talk about that, the I don't care, and it's not about pleasing the audience. And that's something I haven't hit yet, because my style, I like to be very energetic and whatever, but I'm always have that thought of like, okay, are they digging this, and if they're not, like, how can I switch and get them, okay, they're not digging this type of material, let me switch over to this topic, or let me switch to this. And I see that on stage, and that calm and that peace of just like, this is totally my spot. You are all in here, in my living room, and like, this is what I'm doing. And I just admire that. And what, besides the podcast, what kind of, like, when you first started to try to implement that, or did it just you said it kind of clicked?
Yeah, because the whole idea behind it is to have a nice confidence, and have a nice backbone. Comedy is definitely soothing for people, and to laugh. Some people don't want to hear, topics that are controversial or provocative. And well, then you don't go see that comedian or that type of comedian if that's what you don't want. That's your choice. But as a comedian, if, like you were saying, if I'm on stage and I'm trying to please them, then what I'm doing is I'm not being myself. I'm not being the best self. I'm not doing what I love. And then, look, if I'm getting paid many thousands of dollars for a corporate gig, in a sense, quote unquote, selling myself out to make the money that I'm going to make. And they say, look, we don't want you to say this word, or we don't want you to talk about this topic. Well, you're not going to do it because you've made an agreement before you went out there. But you're going to a comedy club, or you're doing a comedy special, or you work in a comedy theater. It's your show, and it's up to you to do what you love. Now, if you do what you love, the audience senses that, and they kind of sit back and let you take over. And if they don't enjoy part, well, like, they'll wait until the next part comes, and hopefully that will make them laugh.
That's something I'm really, once we get back out of this, that's something I really want to focus on. I mean, generally, I kind of just do what I want to do anyway, but I do like to, obviously listen and just kind of go, all right, they're kind of over, this topic or whatever, and switch up on the fly. But
and that's good too. That's good too. And I don't mean to cut you off there, because it's a great point. They might get tired of a premise, or they might, and then it's a dialogue. It's a symphony between you and the audience. So you're doing it, and all of a sudden you realize, hey, wait, I've exhausted this with this audience. Now it's time to maneuver to a different place. All the while staying true to who you are.
I like that. I like that. So let's back up a little bit. How long have you been doing stand up?
In a row, I've been doing it 36 years.
Okay.
In a row. July, it'll be 36 years. I started in college in an improv sketch group. Did a little stand-up in Boston when I was in school. And then I quit college. I quit stand-up after college and didn't start again until 36 years ago. July 29th, 1984.
Wow. So yeah. What inspired you to get started in stand-up?
I went to Emerson College in Boston, and Emerson was a very creative school, and I went for broadcasting. I love sports, and I wanted to be a sports announcer or a DJ or both. I wasn't really sure. I met some friends. We all thought each other were funny. We formed a comedy group, and it was wildly successful. And our mutual friends were doing stand-up. Like Stephen Wright was in college with us, and he was a great stand-up, and we would go see him, and he was just amazing. And it kind of said, hey, a couple of us guys in the comedy group said, hey, let's try stand-up. And, we did okay. If we were in an audience with mostly our friends, they would laugh whether we sucked or not. And, that's always the beauty of having your friends in the audience. And, so it was kind of fun, and I kind of liked it. And I liked the feeling of making people laugh. It was very powerful. I remember in the comedy group, the first sketch I was ever in where I got laughs, it was just overwhelmingly beautiful. And I've been chasing that laugh my whole life, trying to get back there,
Yeah, it's I tell people it's like a drug, this adrenaline rush, and you just want more and more and more, and you just keep chasing it. And it's I wouldn't do anything other than that. I absolutely love it.
Right, and then to finish with the answer the question is, I just thought, well, that was really fun, but I need a real job. And I moved from Boston, where I was going to school, to New York. And I, didn't do stand-up for that time. I did comedy writing in a sense. I did advertising. But it was weird because advertising is mostly lying for a living. And comedy is telling the truth for a living. And I just saw the difference. I really felt dirty being in advertising because I was lying to people. And It's never a good feeling. So I got out of that. I worked for my father. He had an electronics wholesale business, and it was just to make some money. And I watched how my friends who had stuck with comedy had done very well at it. And then that's why I decided to go back into it. And opportunities came up for me to run a comedy club, and I could host on the weekends. And I was drawn back in. And the minute I got back on stage, I went, no, this is what it's all about. This is what my life is about.
That's awesome. Do you remember by chance your first show, the first time you got on stage as a stand-up? As
a stand-up alone, because I had sort of, in the comedy group in college, I had done, I'd come out at the beginning of the show and talk to the audience, and I'd just play with them. And I was sort of stand-up, but it wasn't, I wouldn't say it's stand-up. But the first time was a bar that we all frequented called Crossroads in Boston, and it was on Beacon Street off of Mass Avenue. Mm-hmm. There was a bunch of us who, I can't remember everyone who was on the show, but like Paula Poundstone came by, and Lauren Dombrowski, who was the head writer of Mad TV eventually, and Dennis Leary and Steve and Jim Ball, who were brothers in college, who were very funny and in the comedy group. We all kind of did some stand-up, and we got some good response. So I remember that first time it went really well. And I thought, oh my God, I could do this.
Yeah. And it's amazing. What is it like being in that kind of group with some of those legends of comedy? You mentioned Stephen Wright, you mentioned Paula Poundstone, who I absolutely love her crowd work.
Out there.
Oh yeah. What is it like kind of being in those circles and just being around that and being, inspired, were you inspired by a lot of them, or was it a lot of pushing?
Well, we enjoyed each other's company. We enjoyed laughing, and we didn't look at it. We weren't legends back then. I mean, Lauren was a very, very funny comedian, but we didn't know she'd be the head writer at Mad TV.
Right.
We know that Dennis Leary would star in movies. We didn't know what people were doing. We didn't know where Paula Poundstone's career was, but she, every one of the people I just mentioned made us laugh, and it's a beautiful scenario. Along the way, we inspired each other to continue on, and we give each other feedback and notes. And then years and years and years later, speaking of Paula, I was working in San Francisco at the Other Cafe, which is a great comedy club, no longer exists. And she was the headliner, and she had gotten really incredible by then. And it was like going to school for a week. The week I worked with her, it was amazing because she is the best at working with the audience of any comic I've ever seen. And so I was inspired by her. And then as she continued to, become a stronger comic, and, the more you do it, the better you get. It just, you can't help it. Can't really teach it. You either have it or you don't. She had it and has it. And, along the way, along the way, I had a lot of mentors, people who took their time to grab me and say, hey, what you're doing is good. And here's some suggestions if you want it. And I promised myself that I would be that same person to other comics all along the way. And, and then hopefully those comics that I've helped along the way are helping other comics along the way. I'm pretty sure that's happening.
That's awesome. And you kind of mentioned that. What was probably the best piece of advice that you were given regarding comedy?
The best one, of course, is, how do you get better at it stage time? The only way to get really good at it. We've done workshops together, you and I, and you could workshop comedy, you could workshop music, you can workshop theater. It's a great active action to do and to get better at what you do and to find how other people perceive you and, get honest feedback, which is very important. It's kind of nice to know how you're perceived and learn from that. But stage time is the number one advice. And then the other advice I learned along the way was vulnerability, to have a strong foundation in the truth, and then to be vulnerable enough to, to realize that, as powerful and as strong as we want to be, we're all kind of nerds. And, we can create with this incredible, facade that we're the strongest, the greatest, whatever. But in reality, we're all just humans and we all make mistakes. And thank God we make mistakes, because how else are you going to learn?
Right. Now, it's I always find it interesting when I talk to someone with the experience and, who's a legend in this, like you are. You always sit there and you kind of go, man, it always looks like it's so easy, and you would imagine that there's no struggles and all of that. But we all know that there are struggles, especially in the beginning. How long did that take for you to things to settle in and almost click for you?
It's hard to say, because at the beginning you do most comics have the story of they did well the first time, and then you get at, because you're not in your head about it. Right. Then you get in your head about it immediately, and most second times people suck. And that was my scenario. And then, like a few times later, you do better, and it's never really consistent at the beginning. I can't say for everybody, but I'd say some of the greatest comics in the world have, come out sort of acting like a comedian that wasn't themselves, and struggled because they were not being true to who they were. And you just don't know that. You think you have to, you only see comedy from this perspective. So in order for you to become the person that you are, you have to, you just have to do it and be it. And, I think that's the most important thing. It's funny because 10,000 things are rolling through my head with that answer. The most important thing really, I think, is to just, there's a famous thing, I'm all over the place with this answer, and I apologize for it, but it leads to like 30 different areas. But one thing that I've always heard was Michelangelo is making the statue of David, and he wants to make it, and all he has is a huge chunk of marble, and he chips away at the marble, and people say, how did you make this incredible statue out of this block of marble? And he says, I just chipped away at the pieces that weren't him. And that's what I've learned, is that we chip away at all of the pieces that weren't us. We've been lied to a lot in our lives. People have projected their fears onto us, like in advertising, in, like say parents trying to raise you, and not in a negative way, trying to be a parent for the first time. And then they give you these rules and that they had when they were kids. And we just build and build and build. And we get this big slate of marble around us of stuff that's not us. Well, as a comedian, we chip away at the pieces that are not us. And then we find who we are ourselves, and then boom, we start bringing that to where we're at.
Wow, that's I really like that scenario. That's really cool. I've never thought of it that way. Is that something you would say that a lot of young comics make, as far as a mistake, is trying to be somebody else?
Yeah, me, and I'm one of them. We all try to be like, I saw George Carlin and I loved him. And I would talk like that. Mm-hmm. How can you make something like this when this happens? And that's not how I talk. That's how George Carlin talks. But we only know from what we see. So we start trying to recreate what we see. The only comic I've ever seen, and there might be others, that didn't do that at the beginning was Dave Chappelle. He's a young kid. He came out. He told his truth. Whether you agree with it or not, it was his truth, and he never stopped doing that because that's all he knew. But, all of the great comics that I've seen, I've pretty much seen them at one point when they're acting like comedians, and then you see them grow out of that. And you had originally asked me how long it took me before it clicked. It just kept clicking along the way. I remember a couple of years in, I felt, this is really great. I'm really loving it. I'm learning things. I'm getting better at it. And then 3 years later, I was, even better at it. And then, I had periods where I, would stall, or when I worked at Letterman, I was booking all the comedians. I had to focus on thousands of comedians who were contacting me and their material. So I kind of took a step back in my stand-up, although I kept doing it. I just did what worked, and I wasn't as creative with my own stuff, which is my own fault. And then once the Letterman thing was over, I was able to get back to being myself. And the last 5 years, I've just been building and building. And I've never had more fun on stage as I've been having up until the break.
That's awesome. Do you still feel like you're learning and progressing?
Yeah.
Or do you feel like you've kind of mastered it all? You don't feel like you mastered it all?
No. I feel like I'm pretty good at what I do. I'm proud of who I am and what I do. I have a great time, and I believe the audience has a great time. They might not remember my name, but they'll never forget me, kind of thing. Mm-hmm. And that's what I feel. And it's a cocky thing to feel, but I honestly feel that I leave an impression on people, whether it's good or bad, that's up to them. But I also feel that I can keep getting better and better. I've been working on a book. I've written 320 stories for a book about this incredible life that I've had. And my writing was pretty good at the beginning, but it's getting better and better. In fact, I wrote a piece a couple of years ago, and I presented it to this editor today, and the editor came with incredible stuff that I didn't even think about. So as much as I think I'm a pretty good writer, this editor today really showed me how I could even be better at what I do, or, by trusting other people who I respect, and then learning from that and never being defensive about it.
That's pretty incredible to say, since you've been posting some of those stories on social media, and they're just incredible. The career that you've had and the experiences you've been through are just amazing. But you have all these amazing stories. So let's talk about the one that everyone likes to harp on. What is the worst show you've ever had?
Oh, right. Well, there's always a bunch, but the worst one, and I've talked about it before. What compounded it to be even worse was I was really crazy about this woman, and her name was Susie Allaire, and I've always wanted to see her again. I mention her name occasionally when I do the story, so if she ever sees it, she can contact me. But I was so infatuated by this lovely person, and I convinced her to come with me, and it was the worst gig of my life. And I never saw her again after it. And I understand why. It was a very horrible scenario. There was a comedy club in Boston called the Comedy Connection, and the Comedy Connection was one of the best comedy rooms in the world. It was a small room. It got bigger later, and they moved to a different location. But when it was at the Charles Playhouse, it was pretty much one of the greatest comedy clubs in the world. And it was intimate, and the ceilings were low, and the comics were great, and the community was great, and everyone helped each other out. So it was just really a beautiful scenario. So they also had a bunch of sort of satellite rooms where you'd go out, you'd make $90, to do this club, or you'd make $75 to do this club. And so I was working this show, and it was just north of Plymouth, Massachusetts, where the pilgrims came in. And it was called the Charlie Horse. It was a perfect name for it. And I'm driving Susie to the gig and everything. And I had to borrow a friend's car because I'm in Boston. I live in New York, and I take her in this car, and it's a beautiful drive. It's, it's the coast of the New England coast. And we're driving down, and the water's beautiful, and everything is great. And she was very shy and very nervous. And as much as I'm a comedian, when I'm shy too, especially with women and dating, and especially at that point in my life, there's always the insecurity that's very hard to beat, is that men and women, or men and men and women, whoever you're dating, whoever you like, you turn into like a child when it's like, but anyway, and that's how I felt. So we get to the venue, and it looks like it's a biker bar, and there's a bunch of motorcycles out front, which is great. I've worked motorcycle bars, and I've always had a good time. I've never been in a situation where I worked a biker bar and it wasn't fantastic. So we pulled up and looked in, and we opened the door, and it's like I don't know if you remember the end of Blazing Saddles when they're all out having a big fight in the street. Mm-hmm. Well, people were fighting. It was like 150 people in there hitting each other with pool cues and chains and just pounding each other. And Susie, who's so demure, is like scared. And I'm like, how am I going to do comedy in this place? And where is the stage? And it doesn't look like there's any, because pool tables everywhere. And the guy who was at the door, I said, where's the comedy part of it? And he goes, hey, it's over there. And he pointed to his left. So we leave the room with all of the killing and the fighting and the beating up and all that kind of stuff. And we go, and there's a separate room for the comedy. And sadly enough, we get in the room, and there's only women in the room. And I think they're and this is very sad, the beaten and battered women of the guys in the other room. And I say that because it was a lot of black eyes and a woman in a sling, and there was a woman with a baby carriage and drinking a beer. And it was really very sad. Now, again, I'm going to make anyone laugh, and I think these people need to laugh, or they want to laugh, or whatever. Susie's freaking out. And so now sit her in the front, and they start the show, and they go, from New York, Eddie, and the crowd, woo, the worst thing to do in a Massachusetts place. And I go up, and they're not paying attention. They don't want comedy. They just want to talk among themselves. They're all friends. They come probably every Wednesday, which is the comedy night, and they all hang out together, and they're just waiting for these guys to stop fighting so they can go home. And again, it's very, very sad. There's nothing to joke about violence at all, or the way these people are treated. And, so I really, with Ernest, I wanted these people to laugh and have a good time. They weren't paying attention. I was a pain in the ass that I was there talking into a mic while they wanted to chat with each other. And so anyway, so I go up and I start doing it, and they're not paying attention. They're not listening. Nothing is happening, and it's really hard. And the only person watching is Susie, because she's kind of in the front, and she's looking at me, and she looks like I want to be anywhere else in the world but right where I am right now. And I'm not getting laughs. Obviously, no one's paying attention. Susie's too uptight to laugh, and probably I wasn't funny or feeling funny, or in this scenario, I didn't have the experience enough to work a room like this and turn it around. It's horrible. And the only person who was watching me was the woman with the baby in the stroller drinking the beer while she's pushing the stroller. So I said to her, I said, well, at least you're paying attention. And she just goes, F you, and throws the bottle at me. And I duck, and the bottle hits the back wall, and I'm completely drenched, and shards of glass are in my hair and down my sport jacket. And I'm drenched, and glass is all through my body. And Susie wants to run out of there. And luckily the other comedian showed up, because he was late and I had to keep going until he got there. And I just ran out of there. It was the longest ride home, 35 minutes. It seemed like forever and ever. And it was horrible. I've never seen Susie since, but it goes down as the worst gig of my life. And it not only was it a horrible gig, but I felt bad and sad for the people that were involved.
Yeah, especially when you want to try to help them and give them that laughter, and you just kind of feel like, I wasn't able to give that to them. That's quite the
yeah. I mean, the only person paying attention hated me.
Yeah, and threw the one person who was your audience threw the bottle at you. That's so funny.
I wonder how that baby turned out. This is a million years ago.
Well, yeah, and you were, you were kind of set up to fail with the New York and a Boston, because I'm originally from Boston, so I know, that history. I sort of suffered something similar to that. If I can just say this real quickly, I was in outside of LA, and it was an urban room, which is usually minorities, African Americans, Latinos, and it's not a big deal. I've done plenty of those. And I just moved to San Diego. The host goes, how do you want me to, bring you up? And I said, I'll just say I'm, Boston clubs and colleges, no big deal. And there's, for the people who don't know, there's a rivalry, or there was, between the San Diego Charger fans and the Raider fans, which were very much in LA. And so the host comes up, he goes, "This next comic, he's from San Diego," and they start to boo. Right. He's a Chargers fan. They start to boo more. And he's white, Brian Apprille. And they booed me on the way up to the stage. And it wasn't like that playful boo. It was, the real hateful boo.
Right. You're going to get killed like one of the Steelers fans in Oakland.
Exactly.
And, you're going to die, and you're either going to get out of there scathed for life or die, or both.
Yeah. And I almost did. I was supposed to do a showcase for the owner or the booker. And then the host, I was supposed to do 10 minutes. As he hands me the mic, he goes, "Do 5.
Nah.
And so that I'm like, at that point, they're booing at me. So I just doubled down and I'm like, "Hey, I'm not a Chargers fan. I'm a fan of the Patriots." And like, they just totally booed like I just peed on the Pope. You know what I mean?
Yeah, right. Exactly.
And then wasn't a great show. I was able to get a couple of tables, but then as I was leaving, the comic I was with goes, "Yeah, we should go." And he's like,
yeah.
I'm like, He goes, "They're talking about jumping you after the show."
Oh my God.
All right, we're out.
I did a show in New Hampshire with a comedian from Philadelphia, and we were both visiting Boston. And when you work Boston, which was where I started and where I loved Boston and New England, and we had a gig in New Hampshire, which I love more than I love Boston or Vermont, and I love those places. New Hampshire is one of my favorite places in the country. It's just mountains and trees and lakes, and it's just spectacular. And so we go to do this gig, and I go first, and he's going second. So I go first, and luckily did very well. And I get off stage, I bring him up, and I meet this lovely young lady who was at the bar, and we were talking, and we had a hotel room to stay over for the night, and I was thinking that, okay, something might happen with this lovely person, and we were really getting along. She was so great. And the comedian who was on stage was just bombing, and not only bombing, but taunting these guys in the front. And these guys were like bikers in a sense, but they were really, these guys wanted to kill this guy. They wanted to kill him. And he says to me while he's on stage, he says, "Eddie, go grab the car and pull it around." And when I get on, he says it right into the mic so everyone can hear, because we're getting out of here the minute this is over. I'm like, "What do you mean getting out of here? I'm with,
right.
I'm gonna maybe get lucky tonight with this incredible person." And that didn't happen often for me. I was kind of a nerd, and I am kind of a nerd. So I'm thinking this is really going to happen for me. And so what I had to do is I ran out to the parking lot, started up his car, and he said goodnight and ran into the car. And then we took off with guys chasing us. Like we were in Charlottesville in South Carolina, and wow. They were going to burn him to the ground, and it's horrible. I've had a lot of situations where they weren't really great, but I've had some of the most amazing experiences that any comedian can dream of. I worked all over the world. I've worked with incredible comedians, incredible actors, and worked in some of the greatest venues on the planet. Worked in Bangladesh and worked in Australia and Ireland, and for all the negative things that have gone on, the good things have been 1,000-fold more.
So let's get a little bit into comedy writing. What is your process like?
Interesting. It's all different. One of the ways is I come up with some premises and I go on stage and play, which is really, I'm comfortable up there. So I figured I'd play. I have kind of an idea. I have some little notes that I made, and I'll get boom, boom, boom from one place to the other and ad lib and see what works. And then, if something works, continue to do that. And if it doesn't, abort, and go to the other places. Another way I do it is I'll write out some stuff some ideas, like in the George Carlin way. Like I have this bit about similes and using animals, happy as a clam, and, a bunch of these kind of things. So I'll make a list of all of the similes that have animals, and then make a list out of those, and then memorize that list, and then do the bit that way. And, there's so many different ways I will do it. And, but, some of it's I come from home and I bring notes, or sometimes I come from home and have stuff in my head that I've memorized. And then the third way is I just play on stage.
Okay. What advice would you have for new comics trying to better themselves? We always talk about get on stage as much as you can, but is there other piece of advice, whether it's professional or, you know?
The number one advice that people won't take, and I the same way, is patience. Be patient, because it takes years, and you have to just keep doing it, and you get better and better as you do it more and more. And that's the number one. That's a major advice, but no one will ever listen. I didn't listen. You probably didn't listen, and no one will listen to it. And then years and years later, you go, oh, patience. Yeah, I should have known that a long time ago. The other advice is there are no rules. So don't listen to people, see how you're perceived by others, and your friends and your peers, and see how they feel, and then do what you love, and don't try, there are no rules. So like, if you're a comic who does something different, you do it different than somebody else, don't try to be like somebody else. Be the best you on stage, the comic that do the stuff that you love. And if it doesn't work and you still believe in it, keep doing it, because eventually you'll be great at it. There are comics who would audition for Letterman who weren't right for Letterman. There were comics who were right for Letterman. We didn't have enough spots for everyone, but there were comics who were phenomenal that weren't right for the Letterman show. And I would tell them, don't try to be different to be on Letterman. Don't change what you're doing to fit into this, shoehorn yourself into this scenario. Be the best you out there, and then somebody else will pick you up, or you'll have your own special, and then no one can tell you what to do because you're yourself. A lot of people try to tell comics what to do and how to do them. The truth is you do it yourself. You trust yourself. You learn to let go. You learn to be vulnerable. You learn to stop holding on to the mic or tighten and be all nerd. Just go up there and go, look, this is what I love to do. If you like it, great. If you don't, next. And be prepared. That's the other thing. When you're going to do a show, be prepared for it. I mean, the stage time is gold. And, when you go up there, if ad-libbing, you're really good at it, then use the ad-libbing techniques. But also have material ready. And work on it and improve it. And if you have a piece that works, don't be afraid to add and subtract the next time. Don't throw, like, a lot of people create 5 minutes and it works really well. Then they throw that 5 minutes away and do a brand new 5 minutes, which is talented if you can keep coming up with new 5 minutes that are brilliant. But what happens is you lose out on the ability to take, like, what I would do is take those 5 minutes and then reconfigure it. And in a sense where you go out there and you say, okay, well, maybe, 2 minutes of the 5 minutes really worked well. So let me take those 2 minutes and build on those two and bring them back. Because if you throw the 5 minutes away, you're not using those writing skills to make those 5 minutes even better. That's part of the process, not for everybody, but part of the process for most comics is to not just throw the 5 minutes away, but to use some of that to build and become a better writer, become a better performer, better comedian.
Well, and I think too, with doing that, you waste that time and that energy that you spent creating those 2 minutes or whatever. Why not keep that and just build a bigger and better act with all of that, as opposed to just waste? That's why I don't do topical current events, because by the time I get it down and polished in the way I really like it, it's no longer relevant, and you have to start over again.
But it doesn't hurt to do one joke that's relevant, that's topical, just so you get the practice. You do the joke, it lasts for a couple of weeks, and then you toss it out. If you do jokes after COVID and you're up on stage and you have one joke that works and you do it and you get a big laugh, great. And then, you're going to toss it, and hopefully COVID will pass and we'll be back to normal, or whatever is normal is, and go out there and then, and then it's gone. But you have the ability to try to be topical. Mark Norman, the great comedian, whenever he comes out on stage, I'm so impressed, because not only is material great and he is a great ease in his performance, but he'll make a joke based on some joke in the previous comedian's act. He watches the comedian and comes on stage and ad-libs something about that has to do with something the last comic talked about. And he's not stealing. He's not doing anything negative. The positive is that in the moment, he's forcing himself to create something funny in the moment. And, that's a talent.
Yeah, and it also shows to the crowd that you're in the room and you're paying attention, and you're not just some robot up there just going through your motions too. So that they feel like you're all experiencing the same thing as well. How did you get to start getting involved with Letterman?
One thing about this business is who you know.
Mm-hmm.
And it pretty much has always been that way. And, very rarely is it different. I went to college at Emerson in Boston, and a guy I knew from Emerson, I was living part of the time in LA, a good part of the time, late 80s, and he recommended me for the warm-up gig at Saved by the Bell. They had lost their comic for the show. Probably the comedian quit because it was such a hard job. But the money was very good. And, I, in those days, completely broke and in debt, and it really helped to get that gig. And it was hard, and it wasn't really fun. The cool part about it was literally 4 feet across the hall from the Tonight Show with Johnny Carson, which was great because all the people would come through and you see everyone. And when the show was dark, you can stand on the star and look out in the audience and dream about being on the Tonight Show. Wow. But I did that as the warm up there, and I got some experience. And then it was, I guess, in 88, 89. And then in 1990, I moved back to New York and got some other opportunities to do warm up, including doing 2 or 3 different warm up gigs. And then I got the Dana Carvey show warm up gig. Bob Smigel was the director, Steve Carell, Steve Colbert, Louis C.K. was one of the writers there, and I think the head writer. And it was a lot of very talented people working on this show, and it was a brilliant show, and it was such a pleasure to do the warm up for it. And then that was over very quickly. Unfortunately, it was a little too smart for network television, so they canceled it immediately. And then I was, back to just doing stand up, and I was traveling around the world at this point, going to Europe and doing a lot of comedy there, which was was probably the most influential part of my comedy career, was going to other cultures and be able to do what I do and learn how to pull that off, learning to write for humans as opposed to writing for New Yorkers or writing for the specific groups. And I got a phone call because Louis now had worked at the Letterman show. He was a writer, and they were looking for a warm up. So Louis recommended me, and I went over and I met Dave and got a 6-week trial period, and it lasted 17 years.
Wow.
Yeah, it's fantastic.
Wow. We'll come back to this. I just want to go back and touch on what you just kind of said about writing for humans and performing in Europe and how that influenced you. Could you speak a little bit more about that?
Yeah. When you go to another culture, another country, you could say, hey, that TV show that we watch on Friday nights or whatever, that, if they didn't get on their network, if they didn't get the Streets of San Francisco TV show, I'm just making up some TV show that would have been only about some local thing, they probably get it now. You can't make those references. I never had a Streets of San Francisco joke, but Carl Malden and what's his face, Michael Douglas. It was a great show. Anyway, but when you go over to England, you can, if you're going to do a joke about something that only you really know about, you have to preface it a little bit to explain it more than you would if you were doing it in New York or anywhere in America. When I went over there, I was saying, how am I going to make these people laugh? Well, everyone has dreams. Everyone has fears. Everyone has literal dreams, where you sleep and you wake up and you nightmares. And so if you write material that doesn't matter where in the world you live, then people can relate to it. And as long as you are vulnerable and honest and true to yourself, and you let everyone know that, look, I might have this bravado, but it'll always come back and bite me in the ass if I get too cocky. Mm-hmm. Everyone can relate to that. And that's because that's what every human being goes through. We as little boys, you and I don't know about you, but I know I was taught that to be cool, you had to be macho. Mm-hmm. And it always felt weird, that it felt silly. And in reality, it turns out the more macho you pretend to be, the more insecure you show who you are. To be the most authentic you, the key is to really show your vulnerability. And that I learned from watching all these great comics all through the years. So I learned in Europe that they didn't like pandering, and that Americans pandered like crazy, and still do. You go to a comedy club and there's, hey, let's give it up for the troops. And it's like, there's nothing to do with the joke. And, God bless the troops, but they're the ones fighting, and they should get the applause based on what they do, not you bringing it up. You know, what you're doing is you're using their work to get your laughs and or your applause. And you really, as a comedian, I'm not looking for applause. You know, that's the last thing I really want. I want laughter.
Right.
No, applause is what, you know, that's, you know, you can use a formula and get applause. You can write Patch Adams, the movie, and get all the, you know, that's a formula that works and it's going to work, but it's a comic and you have your own formula. That's you. That to me, that's the ultimate. I know I'm all over the place in this topic, but I learned a lot from working in England. The very smart comedy scene, very smart. Some of the best comedy that I've ever seen in my life is British comedy. I've always liked Peter Sellers or Monty Python, and that stuff to me was always the most brilliant of all. You know, not saying that American comedy isn't brilliant, because it is. But I really learned a lot. Then I went to Ireland, and they're a country of storytellers. And boy, if you pander, they'll turn off on you in a second. You know, they think of Americans as panderers. You know, it's great to be here in Ireland. No, it isn't. We know, we grew up here. It's you know, it smells like urine in downtown Dublin, you know, or whatever. You know, they don't want you to kiss their ass. They don't want you to do that. So I learned how to. They don't even want intros. When I gave them an intro on one comic in Ireland and in London, and he looked at me like, what? And I later became friends with him, and I said, why were you so rude to me when I gave you my intro? He goes, intro? He goes, I thought you were bragging to me about your career. I go, no, I was asking you to say these things to bring. He thought I came up and said, hey, I've done the Letterman show. You know, he didn't know that. He thought I was bragging that I did Letterman show. So I don't care. I don't even, you know, we don't get that on television or whatever. I found out later that he says, why would you tell everyone how great you were before you came up there? How about you be really funny and then the audience knows you're really great? He said, you know, I know a lot of friends of mine who have done television shows. They're awful comics. They just had a lucky set, or they knew somebody, or they had one good set that one night and got television. They're awful. So just because you said I had my own Comedy Central special doesn't mean you're great. Just means you might be great, but also I've seen a lot of Comedy Central specials that I'd be embarrassed to own, and my own. I can't watch my own Comedy Central special that I filmed in 2002 that aired in 2003. I wish I would have filmed it in 2010 or 2012. I was pandering. I was over the top. I can't even watch it without cringing.
That's I think that goes for most people. As you look back at your career and what you do, and you're like, oh, I can't believe that was me, as you evolve.
But you know what's interesting? I saw a set of mine from 1986 in Boston during the World Series. I was doing a show, and I was, you know, I was so green, but I didn't care. I was just had all this energy and dancing around and laugh. And I went, hey, that's a pretty good set. I wish I kept that up. You know, why did I stop doing that?
Good thing you didn't tell him you're from New York then, because
oh no,
86 especially the World Series was the Mets.
I begged them not to say I was from New York.
Yeah, that was the Red Sox Mets year. So we talk a little bit about New York. A lot of comics, you know, that seems to be like the pinnacle. That in LA, depending on where your priorities seem to be. What is it? There are a lot of comics who have no idea what that scene is like, and they always try to get out there too soon. You know, what do you say? What is New York like comedy wise for people?
It's great for comics. I mean, there's 1 million comics, and there's like 7 clubs. You know, and they're not 7, but you know, there's more comics than clubs, and it's not hard if you're really great at it and you're willing to put the work in. That's my brother telling me that's going to be coming. You know, if you put the work in, you're going to get, people are going to notice you, or other comics will recommend you, and you'll get stage time. But it's not easy to get stage time. I always recommend, like I started in Boston, that really helped me, or go to San Francisco, or go to Denver, or Minneapolis, or Austin, or Seattle, you know, Chicago, Atlanta. These are some of the best comedy cities in America. And then with great comedy scenes, mainly because the people who are the people running the places like Wendy Curtis in Denver, or Bert Haas in Chicago. These people, they really create an incredible scene, and you can work a lot and get great at it. And then when you show up in New York and LA and you all of a sudden they've never seen you before, you come in, you blow them away, then they have no choice but to have to put you on. If they see you at the beginning of your career, oftentimes they're not savvy enough to not realize that you can grow. They were like, well, that comedian kind of sucked, and which is a shame. As a comedian, as a booker, I know when I see a comedian, if they're not great, it doesn't mean they're not going to be great. I give them another chance 6 months later or whatever, because I know that you can completely grow I've been doing it 36 years. And last year, I thought I was very good at what I did. I'm better than I was last year, only because I work like a maniac.
Right. Now you talk, we're kind of jumping around the place here with this, but that's okay. Letterman, you ended up being the talent coordinator for comedians. What was a typical day like? What were the numbers of emails or packages that you would get?
Unlimited, tons and tons and tons. And when I first took over, there were like 16 boxes of videotapes. That's how I started as the booker in the beginning in March of 2001. And I had to go through all these videotapes. And in reality, out of the videotapes, and I watched every one, only 2 people made it through those boxes.
Wow.
Nick Griffin, Karen Rontowski, both incredible comedians. But most of the time, I would go on the road as a comedian. Say I'm working the Comedy Works in Denver, and I'm working Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday. And so they'd let me work Sunday. They put 10 of the best local comics on, and I'd take notes and watch their best comics, and then give them notes when it was over. And stay to the end, sit with the comics, let them know how they were perceived, if they were right for the show, if they had if what they needed to do to get on the show. I would always tell them, don't try to change what you're doing. Like I saw some comics that were phenomenal that, weren't right for network television. They were, too sort of quote unquote X-rated for network television. But I would tell that comic to never change, just try to get a network. But there are comics who are sort of quote unquote X-rated who can go on network television. Look at Richard Pryor. Richard Pryor did the Ed Sullivan Show. Richard Pryor did the Tom Jones Show at his height of his genius. When he did the Ed Sullivan Show, Richard Pryor, which was an old CBS show in the 50s and 60s, Pryor cleaned himself up and was, little milquetoast for the room. But when he was at his best and edgy and smart, the Tom Jones Show put him on television, and we're able to get him on because it's not about the language, because language has nothing to do with comedy. Like, we did a clean comedy show together, and we're being clean here. Words are not dirty. Words are just the costumes for intention. It's the intention. Like, if you talk about going to the bathroom, to me, that's gross unless it's clever. But if you say a dirty word because that belongs, like quote unquote dirty word, and it fits because the character normally says that, I don't find anything, in that. I did a show. I had a Christian comic come to me, send me a tape, and it was the most disturbing, creepiest tape I've ever seen. And I was embarrassed for this comedian. And, so just by saying they're a Christian comic doesn't mean they're a great comic or a clean comic, because the choice of material, although there were no curse words, was creepy. And so, it's a hard thing to delineate, because there's so many. Everyone has a different style. You're different than I am, but you've always been really funny. And I can't imagine, since we haven't worked together in 3-4 years, that you haven't, done the work and gotten funnier at it and gotten better and being more comfortable than when I saw you the first time. But you were funny when I first saw you, and I told you, and I never lie or make it up. I don't try to sugarcoat it. I'm not mean, but I'm honest and caring.
Well, yeah, thank you for that. That means a lot coming from you. And that kind of leads me into the same thing when you're dealing with all these comedians who it's their dream, like, I'm going to be on Letterman, I'm going to be on Letterman, and you have to tell them no. Right. How do you handle that?
Not easy. You know, literally, because say 4,000 comedians want to be on Letterman, and I get to put 15 on, and 8 of the 15 are regulars that do the show every year, or 10 or 12 of the comics are regulars that do it every year. I only have room for 3 new ones, or, you know, and that's out of thousands. So that means 99.9% of the time I have to say no to friends of mine, to comedians who are great for the show, but there's no room for them at times, maybe a year down the road or 2 years down the road. It wasn't easy, but it was part of the job. And yet it really sucked because people thought they knew me and judged me based on assumptions. I met a lot of people who said, "Oh my God, you're such a nice guy. I didn't expect that." You know, I did a radio show in Los Angeles, I'll never forget. And the woman who was the host of the show said to me, "Oh my God, I just, you know, expected you to be this tyrant and this tough guy and this stuff." I go, "Well, you know, I don't know how you came up with that. This is who I am." And we've stayed friends, oddly enough. It was her birthday the other day, and she wrote a beautiful note to me. And it made me realize that when I first met her, she was ready to go to battle with this jerk me, and it wasn't the case.
Well, it's like we talked about, and right off the top of the show, the assumptions of, you know, of that. So, and I will say that's kind of, you get that thing because you have this booker, you're the gatekeeper, and you're always no, and you know, like you said, you're always very honest, but you're respectful and you're tactful with it, and so I think people just think you're going to be this ruthless monster, like, "No, you're terrible, you suck,
right.
Get out of
and
here."
I would never say anyone they were terrible. I would just say, you know, because I know that even if you are terrible, you have the chance to grow into be a better comedian. But I had to tell some of my best friends no, because they weren't right for the show. Or like I had pitched a bunch of comedians that I loved, and the show turned them down, and it just broke my heart. I mean, literally, I was brokenhearted by that, and it was part of the job.
Now I know you got to get going pretty soon, but a few more questions, and we can talk about the David Ortiz Childrens Fund. Now you said you did a Comedy Central special. I know you've done network television, and I kind of want to talk about performing on network television. Do you remember the first time you did it, and what was going through your head, and what was that experience like for you?
First network show I did was Star Search in 1986. Recorded it. It aired, I think, at the end of '86, the beginning of '87, right after the Mets-Red Sox World Series. And I was very proud of how I did. I was very proud. I didn't win, but I got my first network experience, and I learned a lot from it. And I vowed that I wouldn't leave Los Angeles without some positive experience. And I went over to the Improv in the Comedy Store, auditioned, did very well. And got to work these incredible clubs, and so that worked out really nice. And that was the first thing I'd ever done on network television. And you know, you only get 90 seconds, you know, so it's not, you don't really get to, you know, like when you're doing, like, say, the Letterman Show or the Tonight Show or any of those kind of shows, you get like a 5-minute set. Letterman was 4.5 minutes. Other shows were 6 minutes. And if you think of your comedy performance as an album, as an hour show, but on these shows you only get to play a cut from your album, like a 4.5 minute cut from your album. So that's what you do, and you don't want to cut your material down to make it different. You don't want to be different than who you are to be different. You want to be yourself. And I think the beauty for me was being a comedian and know what it was like to have my dream to be on Letterman. When I'd have other comedians on Letterman, I knew how they felt, and I knew how to help them along the path to get there. When I did Letterman for the first time, even though it was the warm-up, it was the thrill of a lifetime to hear that, you know, Letterman say, "And now Eddie Brill," and I come out and the band's playing, and they were playing Paperback Writer by the Beatles, and there was, you know, it was like and I went out and the audience laughed and Dave was happy, and it was, what a thrill.
And now you've seen a lot of comedians make their debut on TV. What's one of the biggest mistakes that people would do, or comics would do for that?
Would rush through their set because they're trying to fit 8 minutes into 6. And it's very unnatural, and you talk too fast and blah, 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 and you do this, and then you're not who you are. And you appear, because you're only in a small box, You see the close up on your face. You appear insecure and not in charge when you're rushing, unless that's your style and you're comfortable in that style. But you kind of take your time and you kind of let people know, hey, I got this. You sit back, relax. I got this, baby. I'm not here to please you. I worked really hard. I earned my Letterman set. I'm showing you that that this is what this is what it's all about. This is what I've dreamed to do, and now I'm doing it. And I hope you're loving it because I'm loving it, and that's the attitude.
All right, last question on late night TV. As far as comedians who are reaching out to bookers trying to get on those shows, what are some of the biggest do's and don'ts, or what's one of the fastest ways to get yourself out of the mix?
Well, it's more important about what to do, and the key is to show a shorter set. Like I would always ask a comedian to send me 5 to 7 minutes, then I can get an idea of what their set was like. And if they were great and the whole set was great, then we'd be all set. But if like 7 minutes of 3 of it was good, I'd want to see another 10 minutes or another 15 or whatever. So just give them 5 to 7 minutes because they get thousands of submissions. So remember that even though you're the one person and it's your one tape and it's your whole life and everything you've dreamed of, that these people have to go through thousands of tapes. So they're going to be able to, they're going to judge you immediately. I would give a comic, 3 to 4 minutes. And if they were cursing, which I don't mind cursing, but if they were cursing and they were submitting it for Letterman, if they're cursing, they're not respecting the audition. Or if they were rushing through it, I know that they were nervous about it. Or if the tape wasn't good, I didn't care because, the quality of the tape, because, it's just, that's the way it goes. I wasn't looking for a quality visual. I wasn't looking for 8x10s, that's for sure, because why do I need an 8x10 when I can see you in a video? I have 8x10s where I look really handsome, because they know they have all of those touch-up things, I didn't care about a resume because it didn't matter what you've done in the past. You could have done nothing. You could have done a million things, or you write for the show. So just remember to just put when you're making the tape, don't be in your head about the tape, because when a joke doesn't go over it, and it shows in your face, and it shows an insecurity. So when you're making a tape, and even if you screw up a joke, laugh and have the attitude like, I don't need this show. I don't need this booker. I'm more attracted to that. You ever meet a woman that you like, or anybody that you like, and they have that attitude like, look, I don't, if they're desperate, it sometimes puts you off. Mm-hmm. But if they're confident, you're like, I'm in love with this person. And that's what I think, how bookers look at comedians. I want people to be like, I don't need Eddie Brill. I don't care. If he doesn't like my tape, I'm going to send it to somebody who cares. That attitude and being really, really funny and smart and fitting the style of the show is a big difference. Letterman liked the Jake Johanssons and the Jim Gaffigans and the Wendy Liebmans, the quirky comedians who had great material and performed it well. And, there are incredible comedians who were geniuses and brilliant who weren't on the show because it didn't fit the style of the quirkiness, material-driven comics that Letterman really loved.
Okay. Very good answer. So Eddie, if you want to follow Eddie Brill, you can follow him on Instagram at Eddie Comic, EDDIE Comic, and Twitter is at Eddie_Brill. We have one more thing that you are a part of, I believe. It's the Organic Grill podcast. Is that correct? Yeah. On YouTube? If you want to just tell us about
Talk.
I'm sorry, one more time?
It's called OG Talk, OGTALK. And I interview some of the greatest people in show business, where like comics like Colin Quinn and who else did I? Judy Gold and Artie Lang and Roy Wood Jr., and then rock and rollers like John Joseph of the Cro-Mags, and then I've interviewed Doyle from the Misfits, and I've interviewed Bobby Ojeda from the Mets, and the person who runs the Farm Sanctuary. It's just a mixture of really incredible people with very passionate about what they do, and I'm very proud of this thing. So if you go to OG Talk, it's a green logo. There's about 25 interviews, and they're live, and they're videos, so you can see them on YouTube.
Excellent. So yeah, check out the OG Talk on YouTube. Again, you can follow Eddie on Instagram and Twitter. And we're going to talk a little bit real quickly about the David Ortiz Childrens Fund.
Yeah.
Tell us how you kind of got into that.
Well, I had worked the comedy club in Appleton, Wisconsin, and it was fantastic. And it's a very long story that I'll tighten up. I met this woman named Tiffany, who her last name was Brick. And when I was a child, my brother hit our neighbor Tiffany with a brick. So it's kind of interesting way that I met this Tiffany. Tiffany introduces me. It was a fantastic person, and I met her whole family, and they were great. Father and I became best friends like in 2 days being there. And then she introduced me to her boyfriend, who was a minor leaguer named David Arias. And he was just traded. He was playing for the Beloit team up in Wisconsin, and it was David Ortiz. He was a young kid and a terrific man, and the two of them were a very lovely couple. And I've known them ever since those days, and it's been a long time. And I've been involved with his. He works with kids with congenital heart failure. And all he needs to save a kid's life is $5,000. So I've gone down to the Dominican Republic with him and a bunch of celebrities, and gone down and we've raised money for the David Ortiz Childrens Fund. Now, I just want to throw this in because it's not something we talked about, but Roberto Clemente is my hero in baseball. Mm-hmm. Roberto Clemente, I was able to work with David Ortiz and other people who loved Roberto Clemente as well. Before we did the taping, I wanted to see if I can contact Roberto Jr., his son, about his foundation, because I also love the Roberto Clemente Foundation. And while we were recording, Roberto Clemente called me. And it's so eerie because on my caller ID, it says Roberto Clemente. And it's like, oh, Roberto Clemente called me from the dead. You know, he died a long time ago.
Right.
So I've been always involved, and that's for children. So I've always been involved with children's organizations, junior diabetes and all that kind of stuff. And the David Ortiz Childrens Fund comes out of the same heart and soul as the Roberto Clemente Foundation stuff. And that's working with children to give them better lives and help. And David Ortiz's Children's Fund helps kids with heart conditions. So please donate if you can. I've met a lot of these children who would have been dead, who are now thriving and having these incredible lives because of the work of David Ortiz and all of his people. Yeah,
and that's David Ortiz, ORTIZ, if you don't know who that is. David Ortiz Children's Fund.org. And one more time, the Roberto Clemente Foundation. Okay. Yeah. So definitely check those out. And Eddie, I know you got to run. Thank you so much for taking the time and talking through your career and sharing some knowledge with us and telling the stories. I really, really appreciate it. And I want to thank the viewers and listeners for coming in too. But once again, thank you so much. And I look forward to talking with you again real soon.